Every family business leader knows that relationships are both their greatest strength and their greatest vulnerability. When communication breaks down, when trust erodes, the stability of the family and the business are both at risk. My guest today helps families navigate this conflict, rebuild trust, and protect what matters most, their relationships with each other. In this conversation, we talk about how to spot red flags before they become fractures, what it takes to break old patterns and assumptions, and why courageous conflict might be the most powerful tool a family business can cultivate. Plus, Henry joins us as the voice of the next generation with his thoughts about ice cream debates, difficult conversations, and that eternal Red Sox-Yankees rivalry. All this and more coming up on Building Unbreakable Brands. Welcome to Building Unbreakable Brands, the podcast where we talk to business leaders with a generational mindset. I'm Megan Lynch. I'm an advisor to family businesses and CEO of 6 Point Strategy, which helps generational brands honor their past while evolving for the future. My guest today is Dr. Donna Marino, who is a psychologist and coach and specializes in helping family businesses resolve conflict, rebuild trust, and protect relationships that keep their families strong for generations. Welcome, Dr. Donna.
Thank you, Megan. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Same. We've had some great conversations in the past that I wish we had recorded, so now we're getting the opportunity to do that. And speaking of that, we've connected a bit as family business advisors, kind of comparing notes and seeing the intersection of our two disciplines. And we have had some great conversations, but it was only recently that I learned we were having dinner, and I learned more about your personal why of why you do this work. And I'd love to have you just share that with the audience, because I feel like it's a very powerful thing. And for a lot of family business advisors, they come from family business and that's their why. But for you, it's a little bit different.
Yeah. Oh, I appreciate that, Megan. And, my personal why is very personal. And it's funny, we're recording today on 9/9, and my why is connected to 9/11. My father was an electrician in the World Trade Center, and I grew up knowing those buildings as Dad's buildings. And we have 3 generations of New York City construction electricians. So while it wasn't a family business, there was tradition and sort of a passing down. My grandfather did the Verrazano Bridge, my dad, obviously, the Trade Center, and my brother, Yankee Stadium. So pretty cool stuff. Sadly, my father was there on 9/11, and we did lose him in that tragedy. My dad was really proud of me. I was in grad school at the time and getting a doctorate, and I'm the only, person in our family with a doctorate, and was among our first generation to go to college. When I lost my dad, it was just really prominent for me that I wanted to continue to live a life that would make him proud. And when I moved my career out of the traditional therapy route and into consulting, and I discovered this niche of working with family business, I just felt like it brought everything together for me. My dad was a really strong family man, and no matter what happened inside the chaotic Italian household, you always had each other's back and you always stuck together. And that was something my siblings and I really did when we lost my dad and got through it together. And, the sense of loyalty, I think that's in family business too. And I felt like there were all these values that I had: hard work, loyalty, family, that my dad instilled in me, that I could combine my love of psychology and understanding of people with those values and make a difference in families and their businesses.
Yeah, I love that because all those values that you're talking about, yes, like those are family business all day long. And I think too, when you've had that kind of loss, there also is that sense of wanting to protect it for other people and, save them from their own loss, or if they have these relationships in their lives, like, do not mess it up because this is precious. It gives you such more of a sense of urgency about, protecting what already exists and helping people keep that strong. So I can imagine just how powerful a driver that is.
Yeah, 100%. It's something that, I've learned that someone can be here today and gone tomorrow, and you only get a certain amount of time with someone, and how precious that is, and how precious family is. And, it makes me really sad when I see family members stop talking to each other, or, cut each other off over business. And I saw that before I even got into this. Siblings who created a business and now they're suing each other, and these different situations. And it really breaks my heart to see that. So having an opportunity to bring families back together is really rewarding.
Yeah. Knowing that you're seeing families in these really incredible high stakes moments, I'm curious, when you get the call, are there like patterns or red flags that you see that kind of like make you turn up the sense of urgency or jump into action so that something's gone from like a tense family situation to something that's truly at risk for their relationships?
Yeah, typically it's just the whole breakdown in communication. People are not checking in on their assumptions. They're creating these big stories that they don't know if they're true. Often it comes at a time of transition. So whether that's someone is ready to retire and they're looking at succession, or one person wants to sell the company and another wants to pass it down. A lot of that, not talking about what we want and making assumptions about what the other person wants. That's usually a pretty big red flag. And then you just see people being so unhappy in the business and starting to question what it's all about.
When you see people who are not questioning assumptions and not having those conversations, are there like symptoms or anything that you see that you're like, ooh, this is probably happening in the background? Or do people come pretty self-aware?
No, they don't come self usually. Not when it comes to assumptions, because they base it on old experiences. But with family, we tend to, we still see the dad that raised us this way, or the brother that teased us that way. It is really hard as family members to see each other in our professional roles. And so we have stories about who each other are, but it's often based on long, long ago experiences. So I think that there's a lot of, he's just going to do that, or she's just going to do this. An example, one family that I came into where there was going to be this transition between second and third gen, and third gen would tell me he's never going to leave. He's never going to leave. He can say whatever he wants, but he's never going to leave. And that's because there had been a failed succession where emotionally, right, wasn't ready, and at the at the 11th hour backed out, right? And so I get that feeling, but we were able to do the work, and pretty quickly when we brought everyone together to get to the place where everybody was comfortable, and that business is running really smoothly now. But there were these stories, including the second gen, the story that person was telling themselves about what would happen if they left, right? And all of that was future forecasting that was not true.
Yeah. And how do you break those patterns? Because I mean, I recognize that in myself where I will run through the conversation in my head and it's almost like I don't even have to have it because I've already had it. I know how it's going to
Right,
happen.
right.
I don't need to bother. But how do you get families to break those assumptions?
I love the word story. And if you can get people to wrap their head around that idea that I'm telling myself a story, and am I willing to question that story? Do I know that that is true 100%? And where is that story coming from? I think my role is really asking the powerful questions to get them digging in and to be willing to consider an alternative perspective. You know, when we have those assumptions, one of the things I say when we talk about courageous conflict, I know we'll get into that, but by not having the potential hard conversation where there could be conflict, we also don't offer the other person the opportunity to correct the assumption, to change behavior, to talk about their own perspective. And so it's really, we try to avoid this conflict. We don't want to upset the other person, but we actually cause more friction and miscommunication by doing that. So checking your assumptions with the other person is really important, and stopping that dialogue in your head saying, wait a minute, I don't really know it's going to go that way. And if it does, at least I've said my piece, at least I've done my part. You know, I say, you know, kept your side of the street clean, you're responsible for, and then they make their own decisions.
Yeah, I can totally see that. And I think sometimes the conflict is the assumptions and kind of the interpersonal relationships, but sometimes it can also be like really complex, messy issues like addiction or mental health or dementia. And what is the cost that you see both to the people, the family, and the business when those kinds of issues are ignored and just, people are kind of putting them on the back burner and saying this will work itself out or not having those conversations?
Yeah, it's really bad because people just wait till it's critical and then what? So you have that 83-year-old parent who now has dementia but won't hand the company over, but you wouldn't talk about it before. And now you're in this predicament of how do we do this? And how do we do this without totally destroying that relationship? People really need to have the conversations up front early when problems start. That idea of it'll resolve itself, no. It just doesn't, especially with, the whole dementia piece. I'm seeing that a lot now as people are staying on longer and longer in companies. Family businesses need to start thinking of that now before it's an issue of how do they write this into their family governance, their board contracts, like all of that. Like, what are their bylaws going to be to help protect them from that? And there's a lot of different ways you can go with that. But thinking about if you see someone with addiction early, addiction we try to hide so much of the time. And, someone reached out to me and they're like, we want to pass this company on to our child, but they are an addict. And now what do we do? How do we handle that? Yeah, those things just don't resolve themselves. And if you can get someone in to either help you learn how to talk about it or help facilitate those conversations, it can be so much easier.
So you mentioned a little bit about courageous conflict. You have your own podcast by that name. I'm curious, like, why that title? Like, how is conflict courageous?
Yeah, because so many of us avoid it or we're too aggressive in it, right? So being brave enough to have the hard conversation and to show the respect enough for the other person that they can handle it and that you can get to a reasonable place. Like I said, if you don't have those hard conversations, you're also robbing that other person of the opportunity to correct it. Also, by having the conflict, most people, most of the time, walk away feeling better and feeling closer because there's been this gap between them that everybody knows is there. Everybody feels the tension, but they're not addressing it. You start to remove passive aggressive behavior. You start to move that passive behavior and start having real dialogue. Healthy conflict promotes innovation, diversity. It helps move companies and families forward. And it is courageous because most of us don't like conflict and we want to keep the peace, and especially in our families. But, talking behind each other's backs and saying, this person is so, it doesn't work. And everybody else knows it's going on.
You're listening to Building Unbreakable Brands, the podcast all about brand stewardship and crafting an enduring legacy. I'm speaking with Dr. Donna Marino, a psychologist and family business advisor who helps multi-generational companies navigate the emotional complexity of leadership, legacy, and relationships when the stakes are high. Now, I may be projecting this, it may not actually happen to you, but I would imagine that some families, when they hear psychologist, might say like, ooh, no, like, I don't want that. I don't want a therapist, that it feels like it means something wrong or broken with them. Is that something that you encounter, that people sort of like push away when they hear Dr. Donna or psychology?
Yes, definitely. On the one hand, that is, my special sauce, right? And so there are people looking for that who are drawn to it. But on the other hand, yes, a lot of my companies that I work with in Illinois that are family businesses are manufacturing. They're not exactly the type to run to therapy. What they need to understand is that, one, when I come in this role, I'm not a therapist, but I'm someone who understands family systems, organizational dynamics, who understands communication and perspective taking, emotional intelligence. You need to provide some education and kind of diffuse that sort of thinking and challenging the stories again, right? Mm-hmm. And family businesses tend to be, they're very private. They're private companies. They like to keep things in-house. It's very challenging to earn trust and be invited in, which, just makes me all the more honored when I get the opportunity to do that. So the term psychologist can be a bit scary of like, what are you going to see or what's behind the veil? And when they realize that I'm really coming from a non-judgmental place and an opportunity to be closer and grow the business together, it really helps people relax. And people get so much self-awareness and behavioral change, and the relationships improve, that they become a believer.
I love it. I find too, and I don't know if you see this as well, is you mentioned kind of like manufacturing companies, that they tend to be a little bit more like, oh, we don't, our team doesn't need that. We don't talk about our feelings. But when you do get them talking, we do a lot of like voice of the customer, voice of employee interviews. And even in those, people be like, I just want to be heard. I don't care about the money. I just want to feel respected, or, that it's just such, to me, a reminder that all humans need these same fundamental things, respect, to be heard, and that it doesn't matter, who you are or where you come from or what upbringing you have. Those fundamentals still stay the same. And I don't know if you see a lot of those kind of like stereotypes that end up getting blown up once you're actually in the conversations with people.
Yeah. To your point, 100%, at the end of the day, everybody wants to be seen, to be heard, and to belong. Those are the three things that they really want. And if you do those things, you will have a great culture. And it doesn't mean giving in to every whim. It means really hearing someone out. And when you disagree, explaining your why and giving your reasoning so they know that they were heard. A big mistake people make is listening, and they listen and then nothing happens and the person feels like it falls on deaf ears. How many times do you hear that? And it didn't necessarily. The owner may have heard it and just not agreed and not acted on it. So that's where, again, the communication breakdown. People need to know that you at least heard them. People need to know that their work is seen and valued and be feeling it like a part of the team, right? And a sense of belonging that family businesses, when they get that right, it is like huge. They are better at that than anyone when they get that right. And that's why when there's this splitting and, gossiping and those kinds of things, the feeling that mom and dad are fighting again, you really have to repair that.
So on this podcast, we talk quite a bit about building trust with customers, with the marketplace, those kinds of things. But this that you're talking about is really about building trust inside the business. And I'm curious, particularly like when that trust is broken by a leader, by a family member, when people see those fractures start, how does a team start the process of rebuilding that trust?
Yeah. And it's a hard thing. It's easier to earn trust originally than to repair trust, right? When it's been broken. That is a hard thing to do. I was just working with some clients today on this, and how I start is by working with them individually before bringing them together. And in most places of conflict, that's what I do. I want to get the full picture, both perspectives. I want to work with them a little bit beforehand on challenging their stories and assumptions, but also feeling seen and heard. And then bringing them together, kind of preparing them for that conversation. And, there's things that have to be done as far as, first the trust has to start with me, that I'm providing a safe container for them to talk, that is confidential, that I'm not here to judge or take sides. So it kind of has to start there. I lay ground rules at the beginning. We're not going to swear. We're not going to call each other names, whatever that might be, taking turns listening, not interrupting. And then giving each person that space within, again, to be seen and heard, and helping navigate the miscommunications, being able to turn to someone and say, wait, did you hear what this person just said? Or saying, wait, I didn't hear the same thing you said. Can we ask this person what they meant? It just helps with the facilitation, because it takes also, I'm not emotionally invested, right? I mean, I want the success and I'll cheer along with them, but I can help them see those other perspectives. Trust is hard to earn back, but with patience, vulnerability, being really honest, even when the honesty is like, I don't trust you and I don't know when I'll trust you again. Or, this is the why. Or like, I know I really made a mistake and I know I've been biased because I have these other influences, which may be family members, and working through that. But again, it's being vulnerable. It's providing the safe container. It's agreeing that you have a mutual purpose, right? We may be in conflict, but we both want to be able to get along with each other, or we want the culture to be better or the business to survive. So alignment on purpose, I think, is really important. It's the why behind it. Why should I bother doing this with this person I don't trust?
You brought up kind of not taking sides and being a safe space. And I'm curious, I would imagine that when you come in, it might be like one particular family member who's like, oh my gosh, we've got to get help. They're very open to it. They've connected with you. They bring you in. In that situation, like, how do you make sure that you do gain the trust of the rest of the family who might feel like, oh, this person has brought in their person, their advisor, they're just kind of on their side. They're not really working for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And that does happen. I came into a family and it was like all the women were on board with doing this work and the men were like, what are you thinking? And they were sort of at an impasse there. And I think meeting individually with those that are skeptical or uncomfortable and demonstrating to them, hey, I am here to help your family. I am here to help your business. These are, again, mutual purpose, right? Mm-hmm. This is where we're aligned. The proof is in the pudding. So really having to demonstrate that, but you have to build connection first. How do you see this? What is bothering you? Why don't you want to do this? It's okay that you don't. I can see where you're coming from. There was a situation where the person was really resistant to my coming in and saw no need for it. And as we're talking and past hurts are coming up and I can hear that and I can empathize. And this person who feels like their perspective has never been seen can see that I can see it. That is a big breakthrough then that, okay, we can do this. I can trust this person, especially in this case, the hurt was towards the person who brought me in, but I was seeing her pain, right? So being able to show that I'm not just siding, right, with that person and that I can see both sides. And as we build that relationship, I can challenge both perspectives, right? Because there's usually a little bit of truth in both, right?
Yeah. I was talking with somebody who, when they work with families doing different work than both of us, but one of the things that they'll do is specifically like challenge the person who brings them in front of everybody to just kind of prove that like they're not in this person's pocket. But I was like, oh, that's pretty good. But I can imagine that that's really important for families to hear, because I'm sure that there's people listening to this podcast who are like, oh, I would love to get help, but I know, again, having those assumptions, I know Uncle whoever will not be into this, or my dad would never allow, XYZ to happen. And I think it's helpful to hear like how those barriers are broken down, because I'm sure that is a very common thing where not everybody's on board with the change or a facilitator.
And sometimes I will come in and just work with that one person. Sometimes their uncle, their this, their that is not on board, but that doesn't mean we can't get started on the work. And there's two things that happen there. One, the family or the people in the organization can recognize the positive changes coming from that person. And they're like, wow, what's going on with you? How is that? And then they're curious and more open. But two, I always say that, systems, families, organizations, they're like the baby's mobile above the crib. And if you tug one part, everything else moves. So even if you're working with one person, you are working with the system and you work with what's available to you. In an ideal situation, you get to work with all the parts, but you can still do good work with even one person. And then sometimes, like I said, other people start, oh, okay, this is okay. I'll meet them. And it starts to spread.
I love that metaphor. I can just picture that tug happening. Yeah, that's great. So, you've helped families through lots of extremely difficult but courageous conversations and conflict. Can you come up with one example where doing that emotional work actually protected the business or helped somebody move forward who was otherwise really stuck, just to kind of give people a sense of like what's possible when you do have some of these courageous conversations?
Yeah. I had this client come to me and he was just, he came to me as the owner, third gen owner of a business. And he actually came to me with all this anxiety that he did not understand. He had never experienced this in his life. He was a tough guy. And so we didn't know when we started that this was related to the family business. And it was related to succession and what does he want to do. And, so first we had to kind of talk a little bit about, and not therapy, but talk about like stress management and relaxation training and some things like this to give him some skills to kind of settle down. And then we were through that, we're able to really identify, how do I leave this business when it's been my life for 20, 30, 40 years, right? And this is my identity. And, who will I be and what will I do? And will it be okay? Can the next gen handle this? Like all those questions. And so this is a great example of working with someone individually first and getting them to a place where they feel settled, where they feel secure. In this case, identity, which is huge when you talk about succession. If you don't tend to that emotional part of succession, people pull out at the last minute. It doesn't go well. There can be a lot of conflict. It's a real thing.
Yeah.
So, preparing this person then to have the open conversations with the next gen and to air their concerns and for them to be able to have those courageous conversations about, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm afraid of. And the pushback and the push and pull till they got to a good place. And it's interesting because this was a situation where I got brought in and it was like, no, that's your person. I'm not working with this person. And why do I have to do this? And, psychologist, like it was the whole ball of wax, right? And now, I was invited to stay on and work with the leadership team and, grow not just the new owners, but the people that they had selected as their new leadership team and help all of them grow. And it's been, a rewarding experience for all. And, he's enjoying retirement over here and following other passions in his life. And, over here, the business is thriving. People are getting along. They're learning how to handle conflict with each other. But beyond that, it's not always conflict. They're learning how to be leaders and do it both in a way that respects history and tradition, but also is innovative and creative and drives the business forward. And so it's not always the conflict. We kind of got through that. And now it's about managing people and leading people and developing potential. So,
Yeah, a whole different conversation and a whole different energy, right? When you're in that really creative space of now it's not so much managing what's wrong, but now it's possibility, right? It's what can we do with all these things that we have. I love that story because it is about how one person just from where they were was courageous enough to get some help and work through their stuff. And then the ripple effects that has not only on the family, but the business, and I'm sure even the community, how they show up and how they are as leaders, how they are as employers, all of those things. It starts to ripple well beyond the individual.
Yeah.
So that's great. So I'm curious for somebody who might be listening and they know in their gut that like something feels off, that there's some conversation, that there's some conflict that they're not addressing, but they also just don't know how to begin. Like it just feels too big, too deep, too kind of raveled up. What is kind of like the smallest, lowest stakes first step that they could just do today that might start to kind of shift where things are headed?
Of course, I'm going to say reach out to me and
Of course.
let's have a chat and I can
Mhm.
point you in some good directions. I think, you know, sitting with yourself, I'm a big fan of journaling, writing things down, and start to dive in a little bit into like, what is that gut feeling? Where is that coming from? What are your concerns? But also, where do you want to be? I think that's a big question and an important one to ask. We can get so focused on the problem, and it's
Mhm.
there and we need to treat it. But let's say we resolve that. Like, what's on the other side of that?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what do you really want? What's that big dream? And then what's standing in the way? For some companies, like, they want to hit 1 billion in, it could be 5 years, 10 years, whatever, but they have this big dream, we'll have this many plants or stores or employees and, the revenue. And then like really looking at the cost of not addressing it.
Mhm.
And it's always risk reward, right? In
Yeah.
business. But I think like just getting real with yourself, also identifying who your allies are in the company, who is
Mhm.
on the same page with you, who does get what you're saying, who is someone who's an ally who might be the person that someone who's not on board would listen to. But starting to have those conversations, even in dyads, to kind of problem solve a little bit as you get clarity.
Yeah, that's great. I love the piece about kind of being able to really articulate what's on the other side, because I do feel like it sounds so easy, and then when you start to do it, we have such a negativity bias that it's so easy for us to list all the things that are wrong, but to actually start to say, what outcome do we want? What does success look like? For some reason, that is so difficult to do.
Mhm.
And it almost doesn't matter what problem you're tackling, whether it's personal, whether it's professional, whether it's a business strategy or just, thinking about something. That step of where are we headed here? Like what do we want instead of what exists? I think is such a powerful question. And I would echo your like call somebody, because I do, and I feel like this is something that we've talked about before of like you kind of can't read the label on your own bottle, or sometimes it's just hard.
Yeah.
You know it in your gut, but it's really hard to articulate, or you need somebody to help draw it out of you. And that's where kind of like a thinking partner or somebody to hold you accountable can be really powerful. Because I think for some reason it's also an easy question to back away from.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, we know what we want. We don't have to say it.
And then there's the assumption, and not everybody is on the same page. Oh, well, I think we should buy out other companies. We should make some acquisitions. No, I think we should sell. I thought that was the goal. Or no, we're keeping this in the family forever. We're never. I mean, I have seen that, and nobody is on the same page with what the end goal is. They all want the company to do well, right? That's the mutual purpose, but the end goal isn't in alignment.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. What does well mean? Yeah. And really
right,
getting clear
right.
about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And your point to the negativity bias, it's a real thing. It's hardwired into our brains. I always say evolution is so slow. It was for our own survival back in the day when you had to, notice predators before anything else. And even though our world has changed, we still have that. And in positive psychology, they did some research, and there's been debate about it, but they looked at this positivity ratio, and that it takes like 3 to 5 positive things to match sort of the impact and energy of one negative thing. And so that can really get in the way of looking at what we really want, because we do get fixated on the obstacles, and certainly we want to pay attention to them, but we want to have the motivation from our big dream. And I see a lot of companies that just don't, they have the 1 year plan, but they're not really thinking all the way out.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. You are listening to Building Unbreakable Brands, the podcast all about brand stewardship and crafting an enduring legacy. I'm speaking with Dr. Donna Marino, who was inspired by her own family legacy and shaped by over 2 decades in psychology to help family business leaders develop personal and strategic resilience. And now we have my son, Henry, who's here to be the voice of the next generation.
Hi, Henry. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Do you want to follow in your mom's footsteps in the business?
Yeah.
Yeah? Oh, that's really awesome. What makes you want to do that?
Just kind of the fact that, she's my mom and that, it's kind of just to kind of respect her hard work.
That's really beautiful. I like that. What would you say to other kids who their mom or dad or family member runs a business that they might have an opportunity to work in someday?
I would just say that you don't have to follow them because, just honoring them in the first place is respecting them. So, it's no big deal if you don't.
People have choices, right? What would you say to the parents of those kids, people like your mom and other parents who are running a business and maybe they hope to have their child in the business someday? What words of wisdom could you give them?
I would say that, do whatever job that would make you really happy and that you'd be passionate about. And yeah, just kind of like, if you're going to do it, you're going to have to be passionate about it, focus on it. And yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Passionate. I agree. You should really be passionate about what you do.
Yep.
We've been talking a lot about tough conversations, like how you have to have courage to have tough conversations. Have you ever had to have a difficult conversation with like a friend or someone in our family?
Yeah.
I was just curious what that was like for you.
Well, I mean, sometimes it's like really bad, but sometimes it's just like, I disagree with you. Or it's like a misunderstanding or something. But sometimes it's deeper than that. And that's when it hurts more, but usually it resolves in about a day.
Mm.
But yeah, it's not always like, sometimes it can be more complicated. But sometimes it's just like I think chocolate ice cream is way better than vanilla.
Way better than mint chocolate chip, that's for sure. We've had that difficult conversation.
I would argue that vanilla is better, but but I think we can still be friends. When you have those like more deep conversations, do you ever feel better after having them?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what usually happens to like your relationship with that person that you had the hard conversation with?
Usually we just kind of stay the same and nothing really happens between us. Like me and my friend Elias, we argue so much of the time. Or I have another friend, Thomas, and we argue a lot. But in like an hour, we have already forgotten about it and we've done something else.
Mm-hmm. So you can have conflict with someone and still stay close and be friends or have a relationship with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The real question is, Dr. Donna's brother did the electricity work for the scoreboard at Yankee Stadium. What do we have to say about that?
Whoa.
Can we still be
Me,
friends
myself,
with
I'm
him?
a Red
Right.
Sox fan.
I know. I was like, uh-oh, they're in Massachusetts.
Yeah, I've had some good memories at Yankee Stadium though. This Father's Day, I went there and it was Red Sox versus Yankees on Father's Day, so it was something big because me and my dad strongly agree that Red Sox are better than Yankees. And so we went there, we won, but then after that, we got the opportunity, because it was Father's Day, they were doing a father-son like event, and we got to run the bases.
Awesome.
Yeah,
That's
that day
awesome.
was crazy, and we have like Fenway grass out in our front yard.
Oh, yeah?
A little patch of it. Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah. Those are things you're always going to remember.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I always remember going to the World Trade Center with my dad every New Year's Eve and getting to run all over the building. And because he worked there and their lockers and stuff were in the basement, I got to like go to all the nooks and crannies that the public doesn't see and go up on the observation deck and all kinds of stuff and ride the freight elevators.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Donna. It was great conversation. And Henry, thanks for sharing some of your thoughts and chatting with us. And Donna, if people want to learn more about your work or want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can go on my website, drdonnamarino.com. So that's DRDonnaMarino. And my handle is the same on LinkedIn. And my email address is donna@drdonnamarino.com.
Wonderful. And so we'll link to that, and we'll also link to Courageous Conflict, the podcast, for folks to check out. I'm sure it's a great podcast if people haven't listened to it, and you have a lot more conversations like this and dig a lot deeper into some of these issues. So thank you so much for being with us and for sharing with us and for sharing with our audience. Really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been wonderful and great to meet you, Henry.
Great to meet you too.
Dr. Donna shared so many powerful insights today. The one that really struck me was her reminder that avoiding conflict doesn't keep the peace, no matter what we might think. It actually creates more friction. By holding back, we don't only keep our own stories and assumptions untested, but we are robbing others of the chance to correct or to explain or to show us who they've become. For leaders listening, if something in your gut tells you that a conversation is overdue, maybe your first step is just simply naming that story you've been telling yourself, or journaling what you wish could be true on the other side of the conflict. And if it feels too big to do alone, that is the moment to bring in a trusted partner, someone who can hold that container for you while you do the work. If you'd like to connect with Dr. Donna or to learn more about her coaching and consulting, visit drdonnamarino.com or check out her podcast, Courageous Conflict, for more conversations like this. We'll link everything in the show notes. And if this episode gave you a new perspective, please consider sharing it with someone else who might benefit. And don't forget to leave us a review. It helps more generational leaders discover the podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time on Building Unbreakable Brands.